Hello, we are here to talk about Islam this time. Abraham has two sons. Actually, Abraham has a lot of sons, but he has two that we've talked about, named Ismail and Isaac. And Ismail was the firstborn. However, Ismail's mother and Abraham's wife Sarah, Isaac's mother, had a falling out. And so, if you remember from the story, Hagar and Ismail are actually put out at one point. But Abraham loves his son Ishmael. However he feels about Hagar, we don't know. And there's no reason why he wouldn't have stayed in contact with him. Now, while Sarah's alive, maybe he has to keep it on the down low. But strangely enough, Abraham actually outlives Sarah by quite a number of years. In fact, after Sarah, he gets married again to a woman named Keturah and has 6 more sons. So Abraham's really the Energizer Bunny. Anyway, Abraham and Ishmael establish Kaaba as a place to worship their God. Of course, Ishmael worships the God of his father just like Isaac does. And as I said, they have contact with each other. In fact, in Genesis, we see that when Abraham dies, Isaac and Ishmael lay him to rest together. So, again, the beginning of the story of Islam goes back long before Islam. It goes back to maybe 1900 BC, give or take a couple years, when again Abraham and his son Ishmael established the Kaaba as a place to worship their God, the one God. Now, Islam actually begins in the early 7th century. That's the early 600s. So that means that we're talking, when we talk about the life of Muhammad, and we talk about the Kaaba of Muhammad's day, we're talking about the Kaaba around 2,500 years later than when it was first set up by Abraham and Ishmael. So good to keep that in mind. Polytheism is still the religion of the day in the Saudi Arabian Peninsula. There are many different tribes dwelling there, and they all have their own personal gods that they worship. And so in the days of Muhammad, the Kaaba is no longer just a place to worship the one God of Abraham. It has become a place where there are, well, according to some records, 360 different gods represented there, whether in statuary or some other kind of art that are worshipped there. And everybody remembers the God of Abraham and Ishmael. They call Allah. Allah is actually an Arabic form of the Hebrew Eloah, always understood as the same God, as we talked about before. If you hear anything different, well, that's called hate speak, so don't listen to it. But at any rate, this has turned into a polytheistic religious shrine, a place of pilgrimage for many different Arabian tribes that come there to worship their various gods, though everybody remembers the God of Abraham and Ishmael, obviously. Now, this actually makes a lot of sense because we know that back in the time of Abraham, monotheism doesn't really exist. And so the idea that this shrine would become a place of worship for many different gods makes a whole lot of sense, actually. But anyway, in the time of Muhammad, as we said, 360 different gods worshipped there. And during the time of religious pilgrimage, many different tribes come to worship their own gods. So in the town of Mecca is where this religious shrine, the Kaaba, is at. And in the town of Mecca, as many towns, it's made up of a number of tribes. And the ruling tribe in the town of Mecca is called the Quraish. Now, at this point, I'll put myself down in the corner here. And what I'll put up here as a backdrop are some of the people and some of the places and terms I'm going to be talking about in this particular lecture. So on the top right there, you see Mecca, which is the name of the city. Kaaba, which you'll see spelled a number of different ways, but you'll sometimes see it with an H on the end. This is the religious shrine. And the Quraysh are the ruling tribe in the city of Mecca, which is made up by different tribes, of course. The Quraysh are not only the ruling tribe, but they're also stewards of the Kaaba. So they're kind of in the same position as perhaps the Jewish high priests are, if you think of the temple at Jerusalem. They have the power over that place of religious pilgrimage, and by the way, they make quite a lot of money as stewards of that place of religious pilgrimage. So the Quraysh are kind of in the same situation here. Muhammad is actually born into this ruling tribe, the Quraysh. However, he is orphaned. His father dies before he is born. His mother dies when he's 5, and he actually ends up being raised, well, for a brief period by his grandfather, but for most of his life by his uncle. His uncle's name on the top left there, you see Abu Talib. That is his uncle's name. His uncle is actually the chief of the Quraysh. So he's the most powerful person in this particular town as Muhammad is growing up, and he adopts Muhammad as his own child. Now, although he is legally a child of Abu Talib, Muhammad does not receive the same kind of education he would have received if he was a real son of Abu Talib. If he was a real son of Abu Talib, especially, the firstborn, and perhaps maybe the second and third, just in case sometimes sons dies, but they get an education that would go along with the fact that they are going to one day be a leader. Muhammad gets the kind of education that he would have gotten had he grown up with his original mother and father, which is the education necessary to be successful as a merchant. But what this education does not involve is a scribal training. He doesn't learn to read and write as his brothers, who are the real sons of Abu Talib, would have. But he does get a good education, and when he grows up, he actually ends up being a caravan driver. He works for a wealthy widow named Khadija, and he has a very good reputation, not just in Mecca, but in many of the other towns in the Arabian Peninsula, because as a caravan driver, he travels all over the place, taking goods for trade, marketable goods, and he has a good reputation in many different cities. He is known as a man who cannot be bought. He's a man of some ethical integrity. And this is important in this point in time for sure, because one of the favorite activities of some Arabs is sacking the caravans of their rival tribes. And this is just what happens. I mean, if you can't, if you're not strong enough to protect your goods, then I guess they think you deserve to have them ripped off. Muhammad, however, will not make any kind of a deal to let some of the goods, be lost or whatever to avoid the conflict. He has integrity, and he will protect that which pertains to him, that which he is responsible for. And he develops enough of a reputation that people really don't mess with him in that regard. If you can imagine a tribe of bandits, out in the desert, seeing a caravan coming and thinking, oh yeah, here we go, and then finding out it's Muhammad and going, yeah, we'll let him go by. It's just not worth it. So again, here's a guy who has a lot of integrity. He's respected by people in many different cities. As a guy who can't be bought, as a guy who lives by ethical standards. His employer, Khadija, eventually makes an offer of marriage, and Muhammad accepts and marries her. And at the time when he marries her, he is 25 and she is 40. And Muhammad has no other wives until after she dies. Years later, he will marry other wives. And a lot of the wives he marries later on actually are wives of fallen captains and soldiers and so on. And I don't know if you know this, but this is actually an ethical thing to do. In fact, in Judaism, in the Torah, there's a whole section about how if a man dies, that his brother or closest relative is supposed to marry the woman and take her into his household and actually raise up children that will be accredited to his deceased brother or cousin or whoever. And in fact, that's the ethical thing to do. And some people try to get out of that responsibility because they don't want to split their inheritance with sons that aren't really theirs. And that would be seen as an unethical thing to do, to shirk that responsibility. So again, we don't think of it at all this way today, but that's a very ethical thing to do. And but again, he doesn't have any other wives until after Khadija dies. And by all accounts, he really does love her. Now, as I mentioned before, during the time of religious pilgrimage, all the different tribes will come to worship at Mecca, and although they are constantly involved in different conflicts and sacking each other's caravans and so on, and little tribal disputes, during this time of religious pilgrimage, they have a temporary peace while they all come to worship at the same place. There are a few other people involved in the story here, and so let's talk about them. Okay, first of all, Muhammad and Khadija have a servant named Zaid, and he is one who actually reads and writes. So he handles all the scribal responsibilities, if you will, for their business. In the Greek, we often use the term amanuensis, which is a fancy term for a secretary, and there are some people that are trained scribally this ends up being their occupation, is that they perform these kind of functions for some kind of a business or nobleman or something. Abu Bakr is Muhammad's best friend at the time, and he'll figure in the story prominently later. And you see up here also in the left-hand column, Fatima. Fatima is a surviving daughter of Muhammad and Khadija. They have a number of children that die, but Fatima survives, and she ends up marrying a man named Ali, who is actually Muhammad's cousin. Now, Ali is a real son of Abu Talib. So technically he's Muhammad's cousin, though because of the adoption, I guess they could be considered brothers. But he's much younger than Muhammad, so it's not like they, hung out when Muhammad was a kid. So when he ends up marrying Muhammad's daughter, he becomes his son-in-law, and but actually he is his cousin. And as you already know, when Muhammad marries his boss Khadija, she becomes his wife. And one other thing is going to happen much later, and we won't talk about it for quite a while. But much later, after Khadija dies, Muhammad ends up marrying the daughter of his best friend Abu Bakr, who is Aisha, there in the middle column you see. And so his best friend Abu Bakr actually ends up becoming his father-in-law. So those are the three major changes there. Now you see above Aisha, you see Hassan and Hussein. These are sons of Fatima and Ali. And in this discussion right now, they're not going to figure in, as Aisha's not either. That's why I kind of have them in the center by themselves there. But in the next lecture, they're going to figure in quite prominently. So anyway, those are the major people that are involved in the story here. So moving on, Muhammad spends a lot of time in prayer when he is not working, running caravans or running the business or whatever. And he is a monotheist. He does believe that there is only one God, and it is not his preference, the polytheism of his people. Now, remember now, monotheism exists in this period in time. We look back to Abraham, who is the father of the main three monotheistic religions today, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and they all honor him very highly. And one of the reasons is that Abraham is really kind of a monotheist before monotheism even exists. In Islam, he's called a Hanif, very respected for that. And so there are some things that are similar in terms of the scenario. One of the things that's similar is that both Abraham and Muhammad are monotheists growing up in a polytheistic society. But the thing that is very different is that in the time of Abraham, monotheism as a religion doesn't exist at all. But in the time of Muhammad, it does. And Muhammad is familiar with Zoroastrianism, with Judaism, and with Christianity. And he apparently sees monotheism as a superior religion, as a superior form of faith at this point in time. Another thing that is, similar is God reveals himself to both Abraham and Muhammad. But the difference in this case is, as you already know, when God reveals himself to Abraham, he tells Abraham to leave his country, his city. We know he's from Ur of the Chaldees in what is today southern Iraq. And he goes to another land that God directs him to move to. So this is a little different when God reveals himself to Muhammad. He doesn't tell Muhammad to go somewhere else to another land. He tells Muhammad to stay right where he's at and share the message that he's been given. So that would be the other slight difference here. So let's talk about this this revelation that happens here. It is in 610 that Muhammad receives a visit while he is praying in a favorite cave outside the city from the angel Gabriel with a message from God. And the message is, there's one God. And there's no longer any excuse for worshiping all of these idols. It's time to accept the one God and submit yourself to him alone. And if you refuse to do that, there is going to come a day when judgment's going to happen. Classic monotheism here. But here's the good news. God is all merciful. He will forgive you if you come back and repent. So this is the message, and what Muhammad is told to do. In fact, there is a Arabic term. Sometimes it's translated as read, but today a better translation is recite. And this is what Gabriel tells Muhammad that he is commanded to do. He's commanded to recite the things that God has revealed to him. Now, why is recite better than read? The reason is because read does not mean the same thing that it does today. Today, when you think of reading, you might think of, sitting on your couch or laying on your bed, holding a paperback book that you own 18 inches from your face and reading it. And you're hearing the words, silently in your brain as you're reading it. Well, this doesn't really exist in this time in history. First of all, there's no printing presses, so having your own copy of anything would be exorbitantly expensive. But more to the point, a very small percentage of the population actually reads and writes. And Muhammad's not one of them, of course. So when you talk about reciting, you're talking about speaking the text out loud. When a group of people come together, a good example might be, we talked about the synagogues in Judaism. When the Jews come together and meet in a synagogue on the Sabbath day, and the scrolls are unrolled for the service, there's one person who is up front who is actually reading the scrolls, actually orating the scrolls, or reciting the scrolls, if you will, but everybody is reading together. Everyone who is hearing the words is actually reading the scrolls, if you will, but one person has the extra responsibility of actually taking those marks on the scroll and turning them into sound waves, turning them into words that are heard. So that's what reading is. And today we don't think of reading that way, so reciting might be a better term. So that's the term that I'm going to use as far as the translation of this command that is given to Muhammad. And by the way, we'll find out later on this book that contains the different revelations that Muhammad receives from God through the angel Gabriel, spanning 22 years from this point till the end of his life. This book is going to be called the Quran, which really means the recitation. Or again, you might find some people that say the reading, but it doesn't mean what we think it means. The recitation. So the name of the sacred book that holds these revelations from God to Muhammad is actually named after this command that was given to Muhammad from God to recite. And as I mentioned before, the first visit from Gabriel is in 610, but Muhammad continues to have visitations for the next 22 years of his life until he dies in 632. The main message here, as I mentioned, is monotheism. That God is merciful, he will forgive you, but come back to God now. The greatest sin is called shirk. And this means idolatry, worshiping that which is not God. Or, maybe the flip side of the coin, is bringing God down to any level lower than the worship he deserves. And so, in any way, failing to recognize him as the object of ultimate worship is shirk. And again, it's often translated as just idolatry. So, this is what they're supposed to turn away from. Now, many of the common people actually accept this message. They like the idea that there is one God. And again, we're talking about the city of Mecca where Muhammad lives, where the Kaaba is. So while many of the common people like this message, his own tribe, the ruling tribe, the Quraish, reject this message and resist it. And some of them are very angry that he's preaching this message. Now, why in the world would this be? Well, it might have some economic consequences if ever people accepted the fact that this should be the only God worshipped. And if there ever were any kind of a rule that you could only worship this God, maybe some of the other tribes would not come anymore. But again, that's a best case scenario. These are warring tribes. You tell them that they can't come during the time of religious pilgrimage and worship their God, they're not going to sit at home and mourn and play Yahtzee. They're going to make an alliance with all of these other tribes that are their enemies, and they're going to come and besiege the city of Mecca together. They're not going to take this kind of thing lying down. So the best case scenario is a severe economic disadvantage. The worst case scenario is the city of Mecca gets besieged. And again, this would all be if this teaching, this monotheistic belief system, was overwhelmingly embraced and the tradition was changed. And of course, the Quraysh are not going to let that happen. They are not going to let this polytheistic tradition die, because that is what makes them so much money, and that's what gives them a lot of their power. So they would like to, a lot of them would like to take Muhammad out. But remember, Muhammad is the adopted son of the chief of the Quraysh, Abu Talib, and you do not kill or punish in any way the son of the chief of the Quraysh without his permission. That would be the end of your life. And so as long as Abu Talib is alive, Muhammad is protected. And obviously Ali is protected. Ali is his own, blood son, not even adopted. So they are protected, even though much of the Quraysh would like to see them taken out. However, these other disciples that believe the message are not so protected, and they are often persecuted harshly. So Muhammad sends them away to other cities. Some of them, it says, he sends as far as Ethiopia to escape the persecution. Because again, the Quraysh is really trying to stomp out this monotheistic movement. And if they can't take any action against Muhammad because he's protected, they can certainly take action against any of the common people that believe this message. Now, all of the people you have in this left-hand column under Muhammad, they all believe this message. I mean, they all know Muhammad. They know that he is a man that can be trusted, and they don't doubt for a moment that he really has received this message. So they would constitute his first disciples there. Again, his wife Khadija, his daughter Fatima, his son-in-law Ali, his best friend Abu Bakr, and his servant who handles the secretarial duties, Zaid. This is the first group of disciples, if you will. There comes a time when both Abu Talib and Khadija die. In fact, they die the same year. You might have looked ahead, you might not have, but there actually is a timeline slide here that tells you actually the year that they die and so on. And this is, I think, the third slide in your series, so you can move back and look at it if you want to, but not really necessary. But when Abu Talib and Khadija die, now it's time for Muhammad to go. At this point, he's no longer protected. So at this point, it is not safe anymore for Muhammad. And immediately, people start plotting to assassinate him. Now, fortunately, Muhammad does have friends on the inside. So when there is an assassination plot against him, he finds out about it. He receives the information, and he manages to flee from Mecca before they get a chance to kill him. Now, on this particular night, they have made arrangements to sneak into his house in the middle of the night and kill him in his sleep. And they've been watching him closely, and they've apparently seen him go in and seen through the window him getting in bed or whatever, and they're sure he's asleep. So they wait till the middle of the night, and they burst into his house. And when they pull back the covers on his bed, the person sleeping in his bed is actually Ali. But Muhammad is a few hours out of town on the road. And of course, the assassins pursue him. Being out of the town doesn't make you safer. I mean, out in the wilderness, there's no one to hear you scream. So but they don't catch him. And there are other stories I have no time to tell you about, close calls, but he manages to evade them. And so this is his flight out of Mecca. Now, where is he going? He is going to another town, another city called Yathrib. And the more modern name for it is Medina. And you'll see in the right-hand column there, Yathrib and Medina. They're both the same city. And this flight from Mecca to Yathrib, to Medina, is called the Hijrah. And this is a very, very important event. It is actually the date that Muhammad flees, the date of the Hijrah, is the first day in the Muslim calendar. So this is the beginning of the Muslim calendar, the Hijrah, the flight from Mecca to Medina. Why is Muhammad going to Medina? Well, he has been offered a position there as a magistrate. Now remember, he's got a good reputation all over the area in different cities. And so who knows how long they've been willing to have Muhammad in a position like this, or they've been romancing him for it. But when I say a magistrate, I like that term because some of the other terms don't put the right idea in your mind. Sometimes people say a judge, but then you think of somebody, deciding criminal cases. Most of the cases that he ends up deciding are more like civil cases. They involve grievances, and they often involve one tribe against another. So the two reasons that Muhammad is perfect for this position is, number one, he's known as a man who can't be bought. And, if you have a judge deciding your case, isn't it nice to know he won't take a bribe to decide against you? And the second reason Muhammad is perfect is because his tribe is the Quraish back in Mecca. He does not pertain to any of the tribes existing in Medina at the time, so he can't be accused of having a conflict of interest if he rules against one tribe in favor of another, because neither of the tribes that he would be ruling on would be his tribe. So they give him that position, and one of the things that comes with it is a guarantee, a promise that he can preach his message openly that he has received from God through the angel Gabriel, without any reprisals that his followers can meet publicly. And so he begins to send for the followers, that many of them have been sent away to many different cities, as you remember, to avoid persecution. And so many of the followers come and converge on Medina, and this is the beginning of the prospering of this new religion that we call Islam. What does Islam mean? The closest translation of the word is submission. Submission. But the root of the word is peace. Now, if you just look at the word there, that I at the very beginning of it, that actually is a syllable all of its own. But if you just look at the next three consonants, SLM, that is the root of the word, obviously Islam, but it's the root of the word salam. It's the root of the word shalom. It's the root of the word Salem. And all three of those words mean peace. So Islam really means to be in peace. Now, how does that translate to submission? Simple. When you are in peace with something, with some power, you are submitted to it. You are not fighting against it. You are not rebelling against it. You are not disobeying it. You are in peace with God. You are submitted to God. And of course, that's the only way to have peace with God. That's the only way to have peace in yourself. And Muhammad, being young and idealistic, also thinks that if all of the Arabian tribes will begin to worship this same one God and be submitted to him, he thinks that there will also be greater peace among the tribes themselves. Now, this is one point that later on he's a bit disillusioned, and I'm going to note a few things that he's disillusioned about. And this is not to put him down. This is actually to say he's a good man. I mean, he is hoping for some good results that don't end up panning out, but it is to his credit that he would like this to happen. He would like to see peace among the different tribes. If they all worship the same God, he's thinking maybe they won't have to fight each other as much. If they're all in submission to God, if they're all in peace with God. So again, know that the word Islam, the root word is peace, and it literally means in peace, which closest translation is going to be submission. Again, submission to God, to be in peace with God. And so a Muslim is someone who submits. Now, let me say one thing here. We all know that with 9/11, we've talked about this before, a lot of people in the United States of America knew very little about Islam before 9/11. And so they all got a crash course in Islam, but what they were seeing is this tiny faction, which is way less than 1% of Muslims worldwide, that was willing to use terrorist action to kill civilians to try to get a government to change their mind about some kind of policy that was affecting people across the pond, so to speak. And of course, the vast majority of Muslims are very peace-loving, and the word itself comes from the root that means peace. Now, why am I bringing this up? Because there's so much bad teaching out there. I myself personally have heard teaching to the effect that Islam was created as a militant religion that was planning to use terror to take over the world. And nothing could be farther from the truth. The name itself wouldn't make sense. If I wanted to create a movement that was going to inspire terror in the hearts of people so that they would submit, I would not call it In Peace. It's not the name. That's like opening a Christian daycare center and calling it the Gates of Hell or Satan's Playtime. Why would I name it that? It's so contrary to what I'm trying to do. So if I'm trying to create some kind of a terrifying military force, I'm not going to use this word to describe it. So just looking at the origin of the world tells you right away that the story's being twisted a little bit to try and justify some kind of a hatred of this particular kind of Islam that would like to see anybody that doesn't agree with it dead. And we all despise that kind of thinking, whether it's Islam or any other kind of religion. Lord knows in the history of Christianity, there have been many people that have fit that scenario as well. But that's not what we're talking about in terms of Muhammad or in terms of his teaching, the ideals, and the ethics that accompany him. So we have here a decade until Muhammad's death, and most of that decade is spent in Medina. Let's talk about this time in Medina. Do the Meccans leave him alone? Unfortunately, no. They want him and his movement gone. The fact that he is, many miles away is not good enough. And so what happens is over this period, about 8 years or so, there is constant battles going on. There are constant battles going on between Mecca and Medina. Now, they have different goals, though. Mecca wants to destroy Medina. Medina, the Muslims in Medina, they just want to survive. They just don't want to be exterminated by the people that want to wipe them off the face of the earth. And as a result, obviously, they are going to fight hard to survive. But there is no agenda that the Muslims in the Muslims in Medina have against Mecca per se. They don't want to destroy Mecca. They don't want to kill the Meccans. This is not their, this is not in any way their goal. They just want to survive and wish the Meccans would leave them alone, but the Meccans won't. Now, I don't have time to tell you about a whole bunch of different battles, but I'm going to mention a couple things. First of all, there is a place where the tide kind of turns. There is a time when the Meccans finally come and besiege Medina. When you besiege a city, you're surrounding the city. You're not letting anything or anyone go in or out of the city. And the idea is that sooner or later, these people are going to run out of food. They're going to run out of water. Maybe living in close quarters, some disease will crop up and spread to everybody. And the whole idea is you just lock them up until somehow they die. But it doesn't work. The Medinans, they have plenty of water, they have plenty of food, and apparently they're quite adept at, taking out many warriors in the army from the city walls or whatever, sneaking out to come around behind them and attack them. And so the siege does not go well. And finally, the Meccans are demoralized, and they actually turn around and go home having not accomplished the victory that they were going for. And that's kind of the turning point, okay? Now, I'm going to come back to that turning point, but I'm just kind of summarizing the different battles. One more thing I want to say, just in talking about the different battles, is when you're talking about trying to survive, and you're dealing with an aggressor that wants you all dead, obviously you have to defend yourself. And sometimes the only viable defense is a preemptive offense. In other words, if you know that people are coming against you, and just based on the strategy, based on the forces, based on the situation where the conflict's going to take place, based on all those things, you know that when they actually come and attack you, you have a very small chance of surviving. Then it sometimes makes a whole lot more sense, knowing that this is going to happen, to have a preemptive offense and take them out before they attack you. Anybody who knows anything about military strategy obviously knows that that is the case. Furthermore, if there are people who are committed to your being dead, and if they lose one battle, they're just going to come back for another battle. It's going to go over and over and over. So if they've lost a battle, if you've managed to defend yourself and they've lost a battle and they are fleeing from you, it makes a lot more sense to pursue them and take them out. Because if you don't, they're going to turn right around and they're going to come back to you. Now, why am I telling you all this? Because many verses from the Quran are taken out of context. And one of the ones that I've heard more than once is one about pursuing the infidels, don't let any of them live, pursue them all. And there are some people that are spouting this out of context and acting like this is the teaching of all of Islam today, that they want to kill all of the people that don't share their religion. And that, of course, is absolutely ridiculous. What they're talking about are situations during this 8-year period, the conflict between Mecca and Medina, when they have had enough of a victory to where the infidels are fleeing from them, and they're being told, go get them. I mean, track them down, take them out. They're just going to come back and do it again, like they've done so many times before. The Muslims are just trying to survive, but this is the only way they're going to be able to survive. Now, when you see it in context like that, that particular verse doesn't seem so horrible, does it? You could fit it to many different scenarios in Judaism and Christianity that are employing the same kind of strategy. And certainly in many different examples in the war between nations, even in the last 200 or 300 years. I'm done talking about the battles for right now. Let's talk about a few other things that happen in Medina that are very, very important. First of all, let's talk about the idea of jihad. And we've mentioned this before, and I won't reiterate, but jihad literally means struggle. That's the meaning of the word. And as you know, in all three of the major monotheistic religions, the idea of struggle is central, integral. We talked about the fact that Israel, God changes Yaakov's name, which means a heel grabber, changed Yaakov's name to Israel, which means struggles with God. So, again, Allah is just the Arabic word for the Hebrew God, and jihad is the term for struggle. So Israel, the name, literally means struggles with Allah. Same concept. Why do we have a worse understanding of this today? Well, obviously because the word has been, first of all, perverted by a small percentage of Muslims that have used it as a justification for terrorist action. And secondly, because so many fearmongers have also gladly twisted the meaning of the word to cause you to be more afraid of the entire concept. Now, I can't save the word. Sometimes words are just so twisted in meaning you can't redeem them. Okay, for instance, Holocaust. A Holocaust is a burnt offering, but not anymore. You're never going to use the term Holocaust to refer to just a burnt offering again. The Holocaust will always be the Shoah, when 6 million innocent people died in the concentration camps under the Third Reich led by Adolf Hitler. Holocaust will never mean the same thing again. If you happen to be a Palestinian, crusade is a horrible word. It kind of means the same thing as Holocaust. Remember back in the 11th and 12th centuries when the Roman Catholic armies went into the Holy Land trying to take it back from the Muslims, take it back for Jesus. and wanted to kill all the Muslims, wipe it out. And so, the Muslims are praying to God to save them. And to this day, they give thanks to God for saving them from the people who wanted to come and genocidally just eliminate them. And what did these conquerors call this? They called it the Crusades. So you can't use the word crusade and expect it to mean what you think it means, not to a Palestinian. I remember after 9/11, George Bush, younger George Bush, George W. Bush, making one public speech where he said something about being on a crusade against evil. And hearing that, all the Palestinians said, hell no. That's like saying I'm on a Holocaust against evil. I mean, that's just not the word that you use. It doesn't just mean a righteous quest. It means something historically where the Catholic Church decided that they should kill all of the Muslims in Palestine and take the country back. So that's another word that can't be fixed. Jihad's the same way. We'll never fix it. But I want you to know that originally, it has nothing to do with the meaning that people are telling you it means today. There are three basic meanings of the word jihad. And a little bit farther down in this slideshow here, we will see the term. There you go. The very last slide. And let's just go ahead and do this now, and then I'll go back to the slide I'm on. It's not one of the 5 pillars of Islam we're going to talk about in a minute, but it's such a crucial idea that needs to be addressed. And the greater jihad is the internal struggle in your own heart with God. Your struggle in your heart against anything that in any way exalts itself against the knowledge of God, in any way compromises your total devotion to God, in any way cools your affection for God. This is the big battle that you fight in your own heart. That's the battleground. And again, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they all agree on that. Muhammad calls that the greater jihad, the internal struggle. The lesser jihad is the external struggle, trying to survive. It can be anything from struggling against evil in the world to struggling against evil forces that want to eliminate you. But this is the external struggle. And these are the two forms of jihad that usually most books are going to talk about, you're going to hear about. There's a third kind I will introduce to you too, because again, it's exactly the same way Jews and Christians think about it. And that is in everybody's life who's a monotheist, if they believe that God is involved in their life, they believe that God has some plan for their life, God is involved in their life, and somehow the different struggles, the different conflicts or obstacles in front of them in their life are somehow ordained by God. They're somehow decreed by God. And that God is doing something through them. Might be teaching you something, might be making you a stronger person or a more compassionate person or a wiser person or teaching you how to trust him better. But this is the way monotheists think. Why would God have, let me get terminal cancer? Now, you can pray for a miracle and scream and cry and maybe you'll get it, but the vast majority of people don't. The vast majority of people have to accept the fact that now this terminal cancer, in my hypothetical example here, is their personal struggle. It's their personal jihad. And it is their jihad with God because it is the struggle that God has allowed or ordained for them to go through in their life. And they want to go through it the right way. They want to go through it trusting God. They want to go through it with the right attitude towards God. They want to go through it allowing God to teach them and change them as necessary, and accept this as the will of God. So that's your personal struggle. And again, I gave you the example of someone with terminal cancer, but it could be many other things. Everybody has their struggles in this life. And you can probably think of the struggles that you're going through right now. But if you happen to be a monotheist who believes, or maybe not just a monotheist, I mean, maybe a devotional Hindu or something, but you believe that your God is involved in your life as you go through all of these struggles, and somehow these struggles are ordained by God, then that's what I mean by your personal jihad. This is my jihad. God help me to trust you. God help me to respond in the right way. You might say that when you're being, persecuted. You might say that when you're being wrongly accused of something. You might, say this is my personal struggle when you have a mate that's not being faithful, when you have a child that's misbehaving, when you have a grown child that's being tried for a crime and might go to prison. There's so many things that could be your struggle in life, and that's what we mean by the personal jihad. And sometimes I talked about this more because sometimes that isn't really addressed in the books, but the first time I heard it, I actually heard an imam in Tampa talking at USF, and was talking about, well, this is my personal jihad, and this is my personal struggle in life. This is what God's put in front of me, and that made so much sense. And I thought to myself immediately, it's exactly the way that Jews and Christians think about the same thing. So again, greater jihad is the internal struggle against anything in your heart that is not in submission to God. The lesser jihad is the external struggle against evil in the world. And you might also have your own personal jihad, which is your own personal point of faith with God in your life based on the obstacles that you're having to go through with God. So now we're going to go back to where we were before and continue the story. And remember, we are talking about the time in Medina.